Dobby just awakened his secret ICEFIRE quirk, his true quirk that was hidden all this time. And this changes everything. We thought we knew where this war was heading. We thought we knew how the battles were going. But Horikoshi just dropped an absolute bombshell, so let's get into it. You guys know how this works. If you enjoy our MHA vids and you want to see more in the future, leave a quick like and comment right now to help us out with that YouTube algorithm. And by the way, over half of the people who watch my videos regularly are not subscribed to the channel. If you are one of those people, if you're feeling called out right now, please do me a big favor and make this the video that you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. It would help me out a lot. Finally, this video will contain MHA manga spoilers, so please proceed with caution. You have been warned. The previous chapter focused primarily on the return of All Might and the impending showdown between him and Prime All for One. But that chapter also reminded us of Endeavor's fight with Dobby, a fight that is about to reach its boiling point. We learned that Dobby has been compressing thermal energy inside his body, and it has reached such a high temperature that it could literally explode at any moment. At this rate, Dobby will only be able to hold it together for like another 10 minutes, and then all of that thermal energy that he compressed will be released suddenly. That means his body will explode, and the explosion it creates will destroy everything within a 5-kilometer radius. And if that alone wasn't bad enough, we learned that many of the civilians who were hiding within the UA shelter, including the Todoroki family, are within range of the impending explosion. If Dobby really does explode, all those civilians will be killed, including his own mother, his brother Natsu, and his sister Fuyumi. All Might then contacted Shoto and Ida and told them to make their way from Kamino to Gunga right away. Due to the unique nature of their quirks, they are the only ones who can stop Dobby and save everyone from the explosion. Ida picks up Shoto on his back and takes off at full speed, literally jumping from one building to another as he pushes his quirk to the limit in order to get them to Gunga as soon as possible. The latest chapter starts off a bit unexpectedly. We see two villains from the Paranormal Liberation Front, Getten and Mr. Compress, talking to each other in prison. Getten is explaining the history of the Himura family, and if that name sounds familiar, it is because that was Shoto's mom's maiden name before she married his father Enji. Her maiden name was Rei Himura. Getten says that back in the old days, there was a Himura village chief who established multiple branches of the Himura family. As soon as I heard this, I thought of like the Uchihas for some reason, but anyway, let's move on. This was clearly a wealthy landowning family, because Getten mentions that a land reform that affected a lot of wealthy Japanese landowners back in 1947 did not affect the Himura family's wealth and pride at all, meaning they were so big that they were too big to fail. This was a very prestigious and influential family, and they took great pride in the fact that their bloodline was pure and undiluted. The different branches of the family essentially intermarried with each other in order to keep the bloodline pure, which is definitely something that a lot of royal families did in our own world too. But it's also a terrible idea if you don't want your children to be inbred and unhealthy. With the appearance of meta abilities or quirks, the Himura family began to decline, and eventually they faced a complete downfall. The Himura clan was just too closed off from the outside world, and they failed to change with the times. As a result, it seems that the family became desperate for money, and the main branch started selling off its members in quirk marriages that would give some benefit to the family as a whole. As we know, Shoto's mother Rei was one of the people who were pressured into a quirk marriage for the sake of the family. She was married off to Enji Todoroki even though she barely knew him, because Enji thought that her powerful ice quirk would be a great genetic match for his powerful fire quirk. And Rei's family thought that this match would be advantageous for them. Getten says that after the main branch of the family began basically selling off its members to quirk marriages, the other branches of the family scattered. Getten himself is a member of one of these branches, and he was eventually recruited by Redestro. And now that I think about it, Getten being part of the same extended family as Rei makes a lot of sense. His white hair, his silver eyes, and his powerful ice-based quirk are all very similar to Rei's. And although this random jailhouse convo about the history of the Himura family might seem out of place in this chapter, there is a deeper meaning behind it. Getten goes on to say that over the generations, meta abilities grow in strength and complexity. They intensify as different factors mix together. And it wouldn't be surprising if someone had latent abilities that they weren't even aware of. As Getten says these words, the chapter shows us Dobby. And then after the conversation between the two villains runs its course, the very next scene is the fiery duel between Endeavor and Dobby. The meaning behind this conversation is clear. Dobby may have a latent quirk power inside of him, a quirk that stems from the other side of his family, the Himura side. We know that Dobby inherited his father's flame-based quirk, but he did not inherit his father's resistance to fire. Instead, he inherited his mother's resistance to ice, even though he himself could not produce ice. But what if Dobby has a latent ice-based ability, as Getten's speech seems to be implying? What if Dobby also has the ability to use both fire and ice, just like Shoto, but his ice powers just haven't manifested yet? If Dobby were to suddenly unlock a new secret quirk, what would that mean for his battle against Endeavor? And what would that mean for the final war as a whole? Hold on to that thought, and let's get back to the chapter. We see Endeavor struggling to resist the massive fiery inferno that Dobby's body is currently producing. Dobby looks like the personification of a supernova. He doesn't even look human anymore. He looks like a wild, fiery monster, like a mad, flaming Nomu. Endeavor has now been informed that Dobby is about to explode, and that the explosion could kill both the civilians inside the UA shelter and the heroes who are still fighting against Toga and the Twice clones. Unfortunately, Endeavor has already taken a lot of damage in his fight against All For One, and he doesn't think that he'll be able to lure Dobby much further away from their current location. For his part, Dobby looks absolutely terrifying. He's like a human furnace. Fire is erupting from every part of his body, and he is rushing at Endeavor while screaming, "Dad, look at me!" He almost sounds like a child asking his father to see what he can do, and that is exactly how Endeavor sees it. Even though Dobby now looks like a flaming monster, Endeavor can't help but remember little Toya as a child, and this is of course preventing Endeavor from giving it his all in this fight. Endeavor doesn't want to hurt his son Toya. Endeavor feels personally responsible for everything that happened to Toya, and so Endeavor keeps getting hit and taking damage from Dobby because he can't bring himself to kill his own son. Endeavor screams at Dobby to put out his flames because he doesn't want his son to die. But Dobby seems to have completely lost his mind. He's reverted back to his childhood, and he even calls out to Natsu and asks him to play with him. And to be clear, Endeavor is in serious trouble. The heat that Dobby is generating is hot enough to burn even him, despite the fact that he has a natural resistance to extreme heat. And Endeavor can literally feel himself losing consciousness as a result of the insanely high temperature that Dobby is producing. Endeavor doesn't know how Dobby is even still alive. Unlike Endeavor, he doesn't have a natural resistance to heat and flames. He should not be able to survive this. And yet he is alive, and he's still fighting. As Dobby gets close to Endeavor and jumps on top of him, Endeavor notices that Dobby seems to be using phosphor. He then thinks of Bakugo, and the fact that when someone has a near-death experience, this experience could cause their quirk to awaken. The high-risk, high-pressure situation could awaken the latent abilities of a person, especially when they're on the verge of death. And honestly, the fact that Dobby was able to replicate Shoto's phosphor back in Kamino should have been our first clue that something was going on here. The whole point of phosphor is that it merges the two sides of Shoto's quirk, the fire and the ice, into one. So the fact that Dobby could replicate phosphor suggests that he always had a latent ice side too. Otherwise, him using phosphor in any way just wouldn't make sense. And right there, in that moment, Dobby awakens Rei's quirk. Or at least that is what Endeavor calls it. It's clearly some sort of ice quirk, But we have to remember that this quirk could be unique to Dobby and different from Rei's. Endeavor thinks back to his family and everything they went through because of him. He then acknowledges yet again that this is all his responsibility, and he decides that he can't let Dobby, or rather Toya, die alone, but he won't let him drag anyone else into this either. Endeavor decides to use a combination of his own firepower and the firepower that Dobby is currently generating to propel both of them as far into the sky as possible. As he holds Dobby in his arms and takes off, Endeavor is planning to take them both into the sky together before Dobby explodes. Then, when he does explode, he will kill both himself and Endeavor, but they will hopefully be high enough for everyone else on the ground to survive. Endeavor makes the conscious decision to sacrifice his own life in order to atone for his sins and in order to take responsibility for his past mistakes. But before Endeavor can carry out his plan, his wife and Dobby's mother, Rei, appears. She seems to be using her ice quirk powers to try and cool Dobby off so he doesn't explode, and the very final panel of the chapter shows Rei remembering a young Toya telling her, "You're guilty too, Mom." And that is how this chapter ends. Whoa, this was such a great chapter. For the past few chapters, I kind of stopped even thinking about the Dobby fight with all the focus on Prime All For One and his impending showdown with All Might, but Horikoshi just succeeded in making me extremely interested in this fight as well. We see that Rei is now also taking responsibility for what happened to Toya. Both parents are sharing part of the blame for how it all went down, and now they are both risking their lives to try to save their son. But can Rei and Endeavor do something together to actually save Dobby, or is it just too late to save him? Does Rei getting involved mean that both of the Todoroki parents are about to sacrifice their lives? Will they die? Will they survive? Will one of them die and the other survive? I want to see your predictions down in the comments below right now. Finally, we have to of course talk about Dobby awakening his secret quirk, his ICEFIRE quirk. The true power that has been dormant inside of him this entire time. The clues were there, of course. His hair turning white, the fact that he didn't die after being terribly burnt during this war, even though he doesn't have resistance to flames and heat, and of course his use of phosphor. And I know that quite a few people called this way back years ago, but it's just so interesting to see it all play out. And by the way, this chapter in particular has clearly confirmed that Dobby does have some form of resistance to heat and flames. Even Endeavor is shocked that Dobby can handle so much heat without dying. And in fact, the heat that Dobby is producing is actually too much for Endeavor to handle. Endeavor is being burned. Endeavor is on the verge of losing consciousness because of the heat. And yet Dobby, who should have died long ago under these conditions, is still alive and still fighting. The truth is that Dobby does have resistance to heat and flames, just not on the surface. His skin is not resistant, so his skin can get burned and injured. But the rest of his body beneath the surface clearly does have superhuman heat and fire resistance. If it didn't, he would have been dead long ago. We already knew that Dobby's flame quirk is even stronger than his father's. So it's possible that his ice quirk is also even stronger than his mother's. Or perhaps I should say the ice side of his quirk, because it's likely that just like Shoto, Toya has one quirk with two very distinct sides. It's almost like two different quirks, but they're very interconnected. Ironically, Toya was the son that Endeavor had been hoping for all along, the one who could use both fire and ice. But the fact that he didn't have flame resistance on the surface of his body, on his skin, and the fact that the ice side was dormant inside of him, led Endeavor to start discouraging Toya from becoming a hero, and he ended up placing all of his focus on Shoto instead. But by doing this, even though he just wanted to spare his son from injuring himself, Endeavor created a villain. He created a son who really is just as powerful as he had always hoped, but who in the process of attaining that power became a true monster. What do you guys think? How will Dobby's fire side and newly awakened ice side come together? Will they be two distinct forces, or will they create something new, like ICEFIRE, something that burns and freezes at the same time, something that could be super effective against both Endeavor's quirk and Rei's quirk. Will Dobby use his ice side to cool his temperature and prevent himself from exploding? Like, do you think he will actually survive this war, or will he still end up overheating and killing himself in the process? On top of that, is he going to kill his parents along the way, or will one or both of them survive the fight? Don't forget to give me your thoughts on this crazy reveal and what's going to happen next down in the comments below. If you're looking for an MHA video to watch next, don't ignore my video on all 20 Class 1A quirks. In that video, I explain all the quirks, including their upgrades and updates as of the final arc of the story, so check it out, link in the description and on screen. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more MHA content in the future, leave a quick like right now. And if you're one of the over 50% of people who watch my videos but haven't taken the time to subscribe yet, do me a big favor and make this the video that you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications.